Hey guys, welcome back to For StarCraft 2 Strategy. Today we're going to be taking a look at a Terran strategy. Now in this particular replay, our Terran player is Braddock and our Protoss opponent is Saki. We're going to be looking at a variant of that Marine Marauder medevac build, but more specifically we're going to be concentrating on a general idea when it comes to playing competitively in StarCraft 2. Now there's something known as the metagame, and basically what the metagame is, it's the current game state. It's what's going on in games. It's what's going on in the tournaments that are being taken place. It's also what's going on in ladder games. And what we're looking at specifically when it comes to that is basically the general strategies and tactics that players are implementing. So for example, a general Terran strategy is that MMM build, or a general Protoss strategy is that 4 Warp Gate build, or a general Zerg strategy is, I don't know, Spieling Muta, something like that. Now, what we're looking at specifically as a Terran player in this replay is going for a response to the metagame, or dealing with how the metagame plays out. So for example, we have a Protoss opponent here. Our Protoss opponent, when he scouts us and when he sees that we're going for pretty Barracks heavy build, he's going to expect a Marine Marauder type of composition from us. Specifically, he's going to expect a Marauder heavy composition. Why would he expect this? He would expect this because Marauder heavy builds do very well against gateway units. However, if he responds by getting Immortals, then he's going to do well against a Marauder heavy build. If we, in turn, don't get a lot of Marauders and we get Marines, a Marine heavy build, then we're going to do well against his Immortals. So that's kind of the general idea. It's slightly tweaking these general ideas, these general strategies, to put yourself in a better position based on what you expect your opponent to do because of what they expect you to do. Now that seems a little complex, it seems a little convoluted, but I hope that I was able to get that general idea across to you guys, that there's typical strategies, and based on those typical strategies, players respond by getting builds, and if you respond in turn to their response, then you're going to be in a better position. So hopefully I didn't lose all of my viewers there. I know that was a little ridiculous, but it's a good idea to get into your head, and it's a good tactic to implement, responding to the metagame, responding to what your opponent thinks you're going to be doing, and then throwing them off guard by mixing it up a little bit. So I'm going to go in the build order before we go any further here. We're starting off with that 10 supply depot, following it up with a 12 barracks. At 13 supply, we got our first refinery, and then at 16 supply, we went ahead and dropped our Orbital Command. Pretty standard there. Then after that, we followed up at 18 supply with a factory, and then immediately got our second refinery. We are going to be going for, again, that general type build, that Marine Marauder medevac build, except we're not going Marauder heavy like our opponent expects. We're going to be going Marine heavy. And because we're concentrating on our Marines as opposed to our Marauders, his unit composition should not be able to properly deal with it. We're also going to be getting a Banshee just because teching up in general is a good idea. You don't really want to stick to 2 or 3 units. Teching up and taking advantage of the units of the higher tech is going to be beneficial, and it's something you should practice in your games. Now we are attaching a reactor to our barracks here. Again, we are going for Marine heavy build. Now this reactor takes a very long time to build, and it makes you susceptible to early pressure, so putting this bunker at the Refinery base early on is going to help. It's going to help defend you properly against any pressure from your Protoss opponent early in the game. Now, as you can see, when we did scout our opponent's base, we saw pretty standard stuff here. 1 gateway, 1 cybernetics core, 2 gas. This is kind of the making of a 4 warp gate build. This is what a base should look from a Protoss opponent if they're going for a 4 warp gate type build. So you can expect gateway units for the most part. You do, of course, always want to keep up your scouting. Go ahead and scan your opponent's base at some point. Scout around, look for proxy buildings anywhere. Maybe there could be a proxy Starport, there could be a proxy robotics facility. You do want to make sure you're aware of that at all times. Always a good idea to scout the map. So as you can see here, our Starport has just come up, and we are getting that Banshee. Again, we're going for a good strong mix. We're not just sticking to this one build order and this one specific unit composition. Mixing it up is always a good idea. Again, taking advantage of that higher tech. There's really no reason not to do that once you are comfortable with your micro and your macro. So as you can see, as we've talked about in other games as a Terran player, it's definitely a good idea to scout with your factory if you don't intend on using it. It's got such a large hit pool that it takes quite some time for your opponent to whittle it down, and it can give you some really good scouting information as well. Now as you can see, our opponent is pushing out, and you can see that they went with a build that would do very well if we had a lot of Marauders. This Immortal would do very strongly against a Marauder heavy build. Unfortunately, we again went for all these Marines, and Immortals do not do nearly as much damage to Marines as they do to Marauders. They're not nearly as effective. So again, going for this Marine heavy build, this is our response to the current metagame state, and this is going to work well for us in turn. So we are going to be moving out with this Banshee now, just trying to do some harassment. We're not concentrating on getting Banshees, but we are utilizing the fact that we have that unit. So we're going to attack our opponent with it, and hopefully what this is going to do as well is this is going to force them to get units to counteract it and put us in yet a better position as well. Marines in mass numbers, especially when upgraded with Stim Pack and Combat Shield, will do very well against the Stalkers. So we're moving into his base. We did just finish our cloak, forcing him to pull an observer over to properly handle the Banshee. I'm sorry. I've been recording a few things today, and my tongue gets a little twisted up after casting for quite some time. So in order to properly deal with that Banshee, we're forcing him to pull an observer over. And then, of course, if the off chance that he didn't have an observer on the board, we could have done a ton of damage there. But we're not relying specifically on this Banshee. We're going for this general unit composition, and again, going Marine heavy to counteract his response to a Marauder heavy build. Now he is starting to get a few more Stalkers now that he has seen that we're going a little bit Marine heavy, but what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pushing out shortly. We're going to be getting Medevacs, of course. They're going to do very well for us in healing our units and allowing extra mobility for us. Pumping out a few Marauders, but again, we're not concentrating on Marauders. We're just going to use them as a general backup and support unit, but it's not going to be the majority of our forces. As you can see, he's pushing forward here. Going to try to do a ton of damage. Hope if his ideal situation here would be to take out these supply depots and put us below the or above the supply cap, and then push in and put us in a position where we can't respond by building units to defend. That would be very devastating for us, but luckily we're able to push over and fend that off with this massive Marines that we have here. So again, as I said earlier, upgraded Marines will do very well as long as you micro them properly and as long as there aren't a lot of Zealots on the board. And now again, this is a strategy game, real-time strategy. That is what StarCraft 2 is. And what you do and what you implement as far as tactics in a game is going to change based on what your opponent's doing. I've talked about that before. And just the general idea of the strategy that we're looking at, of going for a heavier Marine build because you expect your opponent to go for a response to a Marauder heavy build. That is in fact responding to what your opponent's doing. But even more so, specifically in-game, when you see what your opponent's doing, being able to properly respond to it is something you really want to get good at being able to do. So if we saw a ton of Zealots on the board here, the point that I was getting to is, if we saw a ton of Zealots on the board here, what we'd want to do is we'd want to start to switch over to more Marauders. And that's kind of the general idea and the general theory behind what we're looking at. Now this is going to be a dangerous spot here with this Colossus on the board. We're going to want to target fire it down as much as possible, put this Banshee right on the Colossus, force him to move back, and we were able to reinforce with some units, and that helped a ton. Also, dropping this auto turret down, it's not a whole bunch of damage, but it is some damage, and you know, every little bit helps. And as you can see, we were able to fend off that attack. And in fact, this is what I was talking about earlier, why it's important to scout the entire map, because you never know when you're going to see a proxy tech from your opponent somewhere around the map. We did, in fact, this factory that we were using for scouting, we were able to hide behind the smoke screen, and this is a blunder on our Terran opponent's part, obviously. This wasn't game breaking, but we were able to sneak a couple of Hellions into the back of his base, so that's a interesting little tactic you can try to implement as well, hiding some tech behind the smoke in your opponent's base. They're obviously going to be able to stop that if he had built a pylon back here, but again, it was just a little bit of a blunder from our Protoss opponent. Now, as you can see here, we are moving into our opponent's base. Again, with these upgraded Marines, we're going to do very well against these gateway units, as long as we can micro them away from any Zealots on the board. Force field puts us in a little bit of a dangerous spot. We do want to pull our Marines back away from any of those Zealots, and as you can see, we were able to mop up his composition there. So I'm just going to go over what I talked about earlier real quick here. The reason that this strategy worked well, and the reason that our build and our unit composition worked in this game, was because our opponent opened up with a build that was going to do strong against the Marauder. And since we didn't get the Marauder, even though he expected us to, and we instead got Marines, we were able to fend off that attack quite easily, mass up a force, and then push out with a counterattack. And that's that general theory to responding to what the metagame is. Our opponent expected Marauders, we went for Marines, and we were in that better position. Obviously, you would say, well, what about scouting information? His scouting information isn't going to give him anything different, because if we were going for that Marine and Marauder heavy build, this is what we might be seeing as well. I mean, we could have just continuously been pumping Marauders out of this for all he knows, but instead, for the majority of the game, we were pumping Marines out of this barracks, even though a tech lab was on it. Just because there's a tech lab on a barracks doesn't mean you need to make Marauders out of it. You can, of course, make Marines. That's what we did. We took our opponent off guard. We also teched up. We got this Raven here. That helps a ton as well. And yeah, guys, this is just the general idea, general concept, something to think about in your games. Gonna go ahead and go over this build order real quick here. We started off with that 10 supply depot, followed up with a 12 barracks, and a 13 supply we got our refinery. At 16 we got an orbital command, and at 18 supply we got our factory. Now once that factory was done, we did lift it off and use it for some scouting. In fact, we were able to land it in the back of our opponent's base. Don't expect this to work all the time, because I will tell you surely it will not, but if it can, then good for you. Get some Hellions out, do some harassment, something like that can always add an interesting little twist to your game. Then a 22 supply, we went ahead and we dropped a reactor on our barracks. And again, while this reactor is building, we are susceptible to a push, so getting that bunker at the front of your base is going to help you a lot in defending any early game pushes. At 22 supply, we also started dropping our Starport, and then we went ahead and we got a Banshee out of that. We tried to do some harass. He was able to respond to that because he had an observer, so we held back on any more Banshee production, and again, we concentrated on that heavy Marine and Medevac build. So yeah, guys, again, this has been for StarCraft 2 strategy. We looked at today responding to the metagame and switching up your build to take your opponent off guard. If you guys like our videos here and you like what we're doing, please do go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Keep watching and keep owning, guys. Now, we do want to be wary of these force fields cutting our army in half. We don't want them to get half of our army up top and half below, because they can basically just mop up the half that's up top while the half is stuck below. So again, using the mobility that these medevacs provide us, we're going to be moving up into their base. Now they do push back their units because they saw that we were dropping off in their base, so we're going to just pick off